Food for Thought on News Talk 760 WJR is presented by Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan and by the Food Bank Council of Michigan, creating a food-secure state.
Today on Food for Thought, we have Shawn Wilson, who's a manager for the Ford Fund and who works with Gerry Brisson at Gleaners and with Forgotten Harvest here in Detroit and all across the state. And so I thought it would be appropriate to begin today's show with a Henry Ford quote. When we think about the huge, big, multi-layered problem of solving hunger in our state, sometimes it's easily to be overwhelmed. But here's a Henry Ford thought that I take encouragement in, and I hope you do too. Henry Ford said, whether you think that you can or that you can't, you're usually right. And so I think Food for Thought here has the opportunity to help us think about what we can do and change the conversation as we go about the work of solving food insecurity across our state. Come back and be with us and hear Shawn Wilson, a manager at the Ford Fund, as we talk about solving food insecurity and how Ford's involved with us all across the state.
Welcome back to Food for Thought, sponsored by Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan and the Food Bank Council of Michigan. Once again, Dr. Phil Knight.
Welcome back, everyone. Gerry Brisson is in the studio with me, Dr. Phil Knight here. And we welcome to the WJR studio Shawn Wilson, who is a manager at the Ford Fund. And so, Shawn, welcome to Food for Thought.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Gerry, you and Shawn have worked together on some pretty amazing projects, and I'm going to throw this over to you, and you give us a little background for that and let Shawn introduce himself.
Well, on so many of our shows, we've talked about how innovation and learning and constant learning is going to help drive the solution for food insecurity. It also drives the solution for a lot of other things, and one of the strategies that we've been employing for the last few years is with Ford Motor Company called the Ford Resource and Engagement Centers. There's one in Southwest Detroit. There's a new one on the east side of Detroit. And Shawn, what a privilege it's been to work with you on this effort. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what those centers are doing and why they're created, and even maybe more importantly, why is Ford interested in having this initiative?
No, absolutely. So, Gerry, appreciate you having me, Phil, as well. And let me just say, it's great to be amongst greatness. You know, and Gerry, you're one of the great ones here in Detroit, so I really appreciate this opportunity. Ford Motor Company has been deep in the Michigan and the Detroit community for years, right? And so we wanted to do something a few years ago to really impact the neighborhoods on a deeper level. So it was the brainchild of Jim Vella, our president and chairman of Ford Motor Company Fund, to really launch an innovative, kind of a unique initiative where we basically took over a center that was sitting empty on Detroit's southwest side, the Old Mercado, and we renovated it. We pick up all of the overhead costs associated with it, and then we invite nonprofits and civic ventures to come in and deliver best-in-class services, right? Ranging from basic needs, economic growth, quality of life. So we'll get into it a little bit later, but when you talk about ending food insecurity, I always ask myself why. And ultimately, it's to help people get to that quality of life that I've heard you talk about on the show, right? And so we feel like we've created a pipeline model at the Ford Resource Engagement Center where people can come in and get basic need services like what Gleaners provides, and then move on to economic growth where they may take a GED classes, job, workforce training, you name it, and then ultimately also participate in quality of life classes. Maybe they put their child into a dance class or they take an aerobics class or whatnot. So it's really a model that's meant to address getting people to that quality of life phase.
And one of the things I love about the model is how you use things like design thinking and community voice. And you don't come in and say, this is how you must do it. You say, what is it that you need? Talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, and once again, going back to Jim Vella, I love the story. He invited a group of community leaders together, had a blank whiteboard there, said to him, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you want to see in the space?" And then he shut up. And, of course, as a funder, you're used to NGOs and organizations trying to cater to you. So they said, "Well, Jim, what do you think about this? Well, what do you think about that?" And he said, "I don't think you understand. I'm asking you, what do you want to see in the space?" And that really gets to the basis of design thinking, which is building empathy. He was trying to understand from the community what their needs were, what they wanted to accomplish in that space, and give them a sense of ownership. So as we've rolled out additional FRECs, whether in South Africa or the new one that we're launching on Detroit's east side, we've really followed that model systematically, where we bring in the community, ask them what do they want to see in that space, reimagine it if money wasn't an issue, like really getting people to think outside the box, because it's an example of what can happen in an entire neighborhood. If you can create change and create an environment where people feel upward mobile, then you can potentially do that in the community as well.
And it's one thing leading to another. And one of the significant things about innovation and how it drives success is that it also drives the next innovation.
Yeah.
So you start by listening. Then you put that into a model based on what you heard. Then you measure the impact of that model. That uncovers the next gap. And then you can talk with the community about how do we solve that next problem, whether it's mobility or transportation or anything else. Do you have a highlight, a story that for you says this is how this really works?
So, I mean, there's so many, there's so many. I mean, when you look at the FREC, I'll digress for a moment. When you look at the FREC, it hits so many issues, right? And once again, kind of going back to the core issue we're trying to solve is what we call social mobility. Right. And so if you look at the data, there's this issue called the stickiness factor, where if you're born in poverty, you stay in poverty. If you're born into wealth, you stay in wealth. So there isn't this upward mobility, the American dream that we all grew up thinking about. Like, if I only work hard, I'll do X, Y, Z, right? And so what the FREC model does is, once again, basic needs, economic growth, quality of life. You kind of push people up that ladder. The second piece, which fits into this as well, is with social mobility, is a place-based strategy. When you look at transportation issues in Detroit, we fund 30 different nonprofits, amazing nonprofits, to come in and deliver services. If you're an individual and you're trying to get all around the city to get 30 different services, or even 5 different services, 10 different services, you couldn't do it, right? And so it's a great solution for mobility. And that leads to my story, which is we're doing this assessment and talking to the community on mobility needs, transportation needs. And there's a mother of 2 or 3, I believe, and she talked about how before she comes to Gleaners, before her appointment, right, which is an amazing client choice pantry, right? She in order to get to her appointment at 9:30, 10 a.m., she has to take like 2 or 3 different buses. And then because it's limited time, she has to get there 3 hours in advance. Now, normally that's probably a normal setting for some people who have to move around the city. But now, instead of sitting there for 3 hours, she's able to take other courses and classes and participate in other things. So she's really able to maximize her time to grow. Because once again, I've listened to the show. I understand and I agree that inherently people do not want to stay at the bottom of that ladder, that social mobility ladder. They want to climb up the ladder. Nobody wants to forever be reliant on someone to help them provide them with the basic needs, right? They want to grow out of that situation. And so we have to give them innovative solutions to be able to do that, and do it from a sense of dignity and pride, understanding that that's their ultimate goal.
And so I'm going to tease up a really tough one. How does this create a better workforce for Ford Motor Company?
Absolutely. So look, just think about it historically. My favorite quote from Henry Ford is, he said, a company that only makes money is a poor company. Excellent. Period.
Wow.
And so, period. So I think there's the greater mankind concept that everyone wants to live in a better world, right? Period. So that's the pie in the sky, right? And that's what we should all be striving for. Then simultaneously, you have to look at when Henry Ford and Ford Motor Company introduced $5 a day wage. I mean, he literally built the African American middle class, right? Because he offered $5 a day wage regardless of race. But what did that do, Gerry? It basically moved people out of the working poor into the middle class, social mobility, right? Now, what did it also do? It also created brand loyalty. So those people who Ford gave that $5 a day wage to, did they buy any other vehicle for generations? No. Right. So I think it's okay to do good by doing good. I don't think corporations should shy away from that. As long as you're doing good for the community from a place of authenticity to really help them. If it helps your bottom line, fine. But I don't think you focus on that as the end game, help my bottom line. First, you go from what I do. First, you go into it saying, how do we create a better world? Right? How do we help people go social, move up that social mobility ladder? And then if the bottom line impact comes, great.
He's Shawn Wilson. He's the manager at the Ford Fund. He's Gerry Brisson, the CEO and president of Gleaners. A great conversation. And fellas, I got to tell you that I was just happy to sit here and listen because there was so much that you both shared there that I want us to unpack in the next couple of segments. Shawn, if you can stay with us, because the idea of social mobility, the idea of workforce development, the idea of what type of society do we really want to live in, and what responsibility do we all have. So there's so much there. We're going to have to unpack it. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on Food for Thought.
It's Food for Thought with Dr. Phil Knight on WJR.
Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Gerry Brisson, president of Gleaners and CEO.
Thank you for making me a doctor. Right, I do appreciate it.
I've done that before. I'm not going to make you a bishop, though. I don't have that kind of juice. Great to be back with you. Shawn Wilson is in the studio with us. He's a manager at the Ford Fund. And so now during the break, I understand that you and I are kind of from the same neck of the woods, as I would say. I'm hearing you're from Atlanta, and I'm from L.A., which you listen to this accent and know that means lower Alabama. So, so that's a great, we're talking in how did you guys meet? Let me throw that, and then, Shawn, we want to hear how you came here.
Yeah, how did we meet, Gerry?
So Ford Motor Company was working with Shawn and also working with me. And we came together around the Ford Resource and Engagement Centers as two people who could really make this happen. And so what an honor for me to work with Shawn and Ford Motor Company on this innovative idea. So I'll leave it at that and let you talk about what would get Shawn Wilson from Atlanta, Georgia to Detroit, Michigan.
Besides Gerry Brisson.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Just besides that.
That's in and enough of itself.
Right. Yeah. So I'm actually not from Atlanta. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Milwaukee. Started my career in the traditional nonprofit sector, YMCA, Children Outing Association. Right. Worked my way up the ladder. Had an opportunity to move to Atlanta and took it. And while I was in Atlanta, I started a consulting firm helping high net worth individuals start their own nonprofits. And really everything from how to design programs, fundraise, develop the board, just the whole organizational structure.
Right.
And along the way, I started working with a lesser-known celebrity named Usher.
Right.
And the question that I posed to myself. So, I found my passion at 14 for social entrepreneurship, for giving back, for helping. And it's also, I always measure what I'm going to do next by, can I have greater impact than what I'm doing now? And so when I met Usher and we started working together, the question I asked myself was, can we take this thing that I call fame currency, which Usher has, right? The influence, all that good stuff. Can you put it on top of serious issues and help to move the needle? And so that's something that we explored for 10 years and developing a youth leadership development program, taking youth from middle school all the way through college, almost 100% high school graduation rate. I mean, just some tremendous work. Wow. But after 10 years, decided it was time to step down. And Jim Vella was on my board of directors, asked me what I was doing. Him and Pamela asked me to come take a look at Detroit, came, looked at Detroit, fell in love with it, and next thing I know, I'm in Detroit, right? So I left to go take a visit and told my wife, I'll be back, we'll see what happens. Came back and I said, I think we're moving to Detroit.
Wow.
But what drew me to Detroit, to answer your question, Gerry, directly, what drew me to Detroit and the position at Ford is, one, I had never been on the grant making side. So I asked myself that same question. Could I have, as much impact stroking a check, right? As I have been, on the other side.
Right.
The second piece was that I think Ford Motor Company Fund does an amazing job of partnering in the community. So they're not just grant makers, right? We're not just grant makers.
Right. What
you see going on with the Ford Resource and Engagement Center, which is really a collaboration between Ford, Gleaners, and then, 20, 30 other NGOs, that's more Ford Fund style. So that was really attractive to me. And then ultimately the passion to say, my life is giving back. It always will be. I saw such tremendous opportunity in Detroit. I saw such strong people in Detroit that, once again, it's not about someone coming in to save anybody. It's about saying, hey, I have resources, through the Ford Motor Company Fund. Help me distribute them in the best way with the greatest impact in the community.
So, I think, Shawn, I listened to your story, and it reminds me, and Gerry's heard me talk about this before, that every one of us, no matter who we are, what our title is or it isn't, we're all given one handful of life. And the question we have to answer is, are we going to spend that life or are we going to invest it?
Right.
And, too many folks are spending that life and not investing. Now, as I gotten a little older, I think you need to do a little of both. That's right. That's right. But I really have to say that I think that you're a living example of the right answer to that question.
Oh,
do we just spend our life or do we invest it? And obviously you've chosen to invest your life, and anybody who can ask themselves that question, does this next position, this next place, does it allow me to have more impact than what I've had previously? And that's also to be challenged, right?
Absolutely.
And it makes you look at the truth in a really, really critical way. So, and again, as I've appreciated working with Shawn and the Ford Motor Company Fund on this project, there is no good enough. Whatever you're doing today is just what's going to get you to tomorrow so you can be better. And I love that attitude. I love that momentum. And it's exactly that which drives the kind of innovation. It's not just about doing new things. It's about learning from everything you do, new or not new. And when you get into that mode with people who agree that that's the right way to do things, you begin to uncover opportunities you never saw before.
Absolutely. And have an impact that you never thought you could have, and that's powerful to me, so it's, as I travel the country, every now and then I'll run into, for instance, when I was in Milwaukee, I worked at the YMCA. I hired this young man named Reggie Moore. He's running his own nonprofit in Milwaukee now, doing some amazing things. I see him on LinkedIn, and you're like, wow, I had opportunity to pour just a little bit into him, right? Yeah. And you start to see that legacy that you're leaving and that investment that you're leaving, and that's a powerful thing.
Well, I think probably the highest value that we could have on the return of an investment in our own life is when, we come to the place where we're able to influence the influencers.
Right. Right.
Now we know that we stopped adding, and now we're multiplying.
That's right. And that's true whether you're working with an Usher or a Ford.
Right.
Exactly. Usher has a certain, because people always say to me, is it a big difference, working with the Usher and a Ford? It is, but it isn't. I mean, you still have two really big brands. Obviously the Ford brand's much bigger, right?
Pretty
you can't get bigger than that. Globally, right? But you still have big brands that you're trying to take that oval and shine it, or take that Usher name and shine it into corners where they need that, right?
Exactly.
And so you're trying to leverage that no matter what. So it's all the same.
And I love to, back to the first segment that you were here with us, you talked about the quality of life, and I think the larger question there for all of us, and one that you guys are obviously not shying away from and answering, is what kind of culture do we want to live in, with the understanding that the weakest link in the chain affects the overall strength of the chain, right?
Absolutely.
So if we're not giving people social mobility upward and I agree with you. I think they want it.
Absolutely.
I think people want it.
Absolutely.
That but it would be a much simpler thing just to sell cars and trucks, wouldn't it?
No, absolutely. But once again, you don't want to live in your tower. Go into your garage, drive your car, and come back, right? You want to be able to interact, because that's when you're really living. We're talking about living and how you want to live.
Right.
One of the greatest joys is being able to really understand your neighbor and understand different levels. And look, I was the kid who, family had to go pick up a box. We had to pack the boxes, and then we had a, and then we got a box to take home with us, right?
Right.
And so I was that kid, and I can tell you from, my household to everyone in the neighborhood, everybody wanted to do better. Everyone wanted a better life.
Absolutely.
Right. Everybody wanted to get out of that situation. And so I think it's up to us to build not give them charity, but to give them a leg up. I mean, that's what they want.
The pipeline. It's the pipeline that we started talking about that we're coming right back to. And also keeping in mind, this is where all your employees live.
Right.
So the people that work for you are living in this community too, and they want to see their neighbors do well.
That's right.
Right? They want to see the grass cut, and they want to see good windows, and they want to see a walkable street. I mean, that's what everybody wants, and you start by knowing what you have to do and then doing it.
Well, and look, and we're in a situation in a time where we're giving two options. Like, if I want to do better, that means you can't do better. So we have to break away from that and say, hey, I want to do better, but not at your expense, right? And so if I can figure out how to do better, but then help you do better as well, now we're living in a happier society.
Well, that poverty mentality, I'm going to tell you, it permeates just about every industry, including nonprofit. I don't mind if you get your funding, but I want mine first.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that's it is a mindset that has put a lid on our ability to make a difference and our effectiveness for way too long. There's not one money tree. In fact, I would say money is the least of our issues when it comes to solving these problems.
Absolutely. And let me say this. I think, and once again, I joke with Gerry a lot, but I think he's one of the individuals who get it. So as a funder, there aren't, to your point, there's no unlimited resources at Ford. Right. And so you can't rely on a Ford to give you, X amount of dollars every year into perpetuity. You just can't. So one of the things I love about what Gerry does at Gleaners is he looks for earned revenue models. He looks for ways to be more efficient. He looks for ways to scale. And that's what funders really get excited about, to say, okay, can you make your model 20% self-sufficient? 80% self-sufficient, whatever it is. Are you thinking like that? Are you thinking like a business in a good way to say, hey, we understand we need multiple revenue streams in order to be able to sustain this thing? And that's where we have to move. And once again, I was on the other side asking for money for 20 years. So I get it. And when you're relying on that $500,000 from such and such every year, and all of a sudden leadership changes, and they're not focused on youth leadership anymore. They're focused on hunger. Well, hunger is important. Right. But you just took $500,000 out of my budget, right? And so we have to figure out how to kind of sustain that.
Absolutely. He's Shawn Wilson. He's the manager at the Ford Fund. Gerry Brisson is here in the studio. I'm Dr. Phil Knight. You're listening to Food for Thought. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Food for Thought with Dr. Phil Knight, sponsored by the Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan and the Food Bank Council of Michigan, creating a food-secure state.
Shawn Wilson is manager at Ford Fund, me, Dr. Phil Knight, and we're discussing some pretty cool concepts here as they relate to solving food insecurity across the state of Michigan. So, Shawn, you led with a quote from Henry Ford, and our listeners and my cohorts here, Mark and Gerry, know that I'm a quote hound. So let me just share one of my Henry Ford quotes that I really like, and then I'm going to watch you guys hit this back and forth. Capital punishment, Henry Ford said, is as fundamentally wrong as a cure for crime as charity is wrong as a cure for poverty.
Yeah, what a insightful it's very insightful, right? Here's the thing. If we assume that people have the capacity to do the things they need to do, then you don't approach this from a charitable perspective. You approach it from an investment perspective.
Enabling.
Exactly right.
Right.
Exactly right. And that gets right back to the pipeline, Shawn, you started talking about when we were talking about the why of the Ford Resource and Engagement Centers.
Absolutely, because the ultimate goal has to be to give those who want the opportunity the opportunity to move up that ladder, and honestly, from my experience working, in the community for, 20 plus years, the majority of the people do. Now, of course, you're going to always have the outliers, but that's not even worth talking about because that's such a small fraction, right? But, I'll never forget I was in Miami last year on vacation, laying on the beach, just trying to relax. And, me and my wife were in one cabana, and there's this guy and his wife in another cabana, and they started talking to someone else on the beach. And the other guy just started saying, well, the problem with our system is that people make more money if they don't work, in the inner cities, than if they do. So they have no incentives to get off. Now, the problem is I had a pina colada at that point, right? So of course, I jump into the debate. My wife's trying to pull me back, like, Shawn,
Right.
You're on vacation. And I was saying, have you ever tried to live off of, assistance? Have you ever, there's no one in their right mind who
Right.
would want to stay in that situation. Nobody.
Right.
And so using that as the basis to say the majority of people do want to climb up that ladder, then we have to figure out innovative ways to do it. So for instance, from what I love about food insecurity as a immediate solution is that, I've heard you say, like, look, if you're hungry, you only have one problem.
Right.
Right. So if you solve that first problem, now we can start to say, okay, well, now what other issues do you have? Now, how do we, help you enable you, or not enable, but how do we, give you the tools you need to go up that ladder?
Right.
And we have to get innovative and start to cross breed solutions, not sit in our bubbles. So one of the things I've talked with Gerry about at the Freck is we really want to bring this concept of the old economy and the new economy, or the traditional economy and the innovation economy together. Mm-hmm. Very similar, right? So you bring people together and you say, hey, Phil, I know you need a job, right? I know you need food. Let's solve the food issue first. Boom.
Right.
Now we know you need a job. So we're going to put you through this job training program, which will net you a $15 an hour job. That doesn't break the poverty cycle. That doesn't bring people up the ladder.
Right.
But then simultaneously, we start to say, okay, Phil, now on nights and weekends, if you really want to work hard and get out of this situation, here's some developer coding courses.
Right.
What are you doing from an entrepreneurship standpoint? Here's some pre-accelerators that we can put you in that
Wow.
get you into the accelerator, et cetera, et cetera. So now within a couple years, 3 years, 5 years, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you're able to move people up the ladder. And if they know that I'm not stuck at $15 an hour for the rest of my life, right, they're motivated to do these other things.
That echoes so many conversations we've had on Food for Thought. From Rob Fowler, the CEO of the Small Business Association, who was a guest on the show, to say that entrepreneurship is the ticket
Absolutely.
out of poverty.
Absolutely.
To Cindy Estrada over at the UAW to say that, hey, we're manufacturing poverty in so many of our jobs, but yet if we can give people the tools they need, to our conversation to say if we can take hunger off the table,
Right.
we relieve people from the toxic stress that it brings to their life. Now their mind's free to think about job opportunities and retraining and health care, and they're not worried about what they're going to eat or what they're going to give their kids.
Absolutely. And look, I have a lot of mentors, because that's one thing I believe in, right, is having mentors. And the majority of my mentors, I would say 90% of them, are entrepreneurs, right? But they're not exclusively entrepreneurs. And what I
Right.
mean by that is they have a 9-to-5 job, but they
Right.
may invest in technology. They may invest in franchises. They may, whatever the case is,
Right.
they may do it, right? And so often, especially as African-American, I can tell you, so often in the African-American community, we feel like we have to choose. Well, either I need that 9-to-5 or I need to go all in as an entrepreneur.
Right.
We got
No.
to shift that mindset, because only good things happen when you diversify your revenue streams, your income.
Right.
And only good things happen.
Only good things.
And I think we have to set expectations in the right way, too. So I'll give a personal example from my own life. I used to smoke 3.5 packs of cigarettes a day.
Wow.
I had one in my mouth all the time, right? The hardest thing I ever did was quit smoking. It took me 40 or more tries, right? So when we start talking about moving people up the ladder, we know that it's going to take several tries, and we know that what we tried today might not work tomorrow. Cold turkey did not work for me. It finally took Nicorette gum. Well, the first time I quit smoking, there was no such thing. But somebody figured out that might help somebody. And it helped me. And I used that tool. It was a crutch, no doubt, and then I had to get off of that too. But nonetheless, that was a ladder for me that worked. So when we think about the people we're helping, to expect that just because we put something in place, it's going to work for everyone right now, no. That's why the learning, that's why the data collection, that's why innovation has to be paired with information so that you can learn what works and you can get the right things to right people at the right time.
And no absolutes, right? So often when we're thinking about solutions in the community, it's an absolute, well, this kind of technology coding program won't work in this neighborhood, in this community, right? It's an absolute. Well, no, let's not be so lazy. Right, as people who are trying to help. Let's dig down. Well, why? Well, because a coding boot camp, a 6-week coding boot camp, is from 8 to 5. Right. But now you're not going to get anyone there, because those who need to work are working. Those who don't have the skill set to code, they're the ones who are going to come, but they don't even have the basic code, right? So if you offer the coding boot camp on nights and weekends and stretch it out over a year, now maybe you have a solution. Now that person can go up that ladder. So I think it's on us as funders, right? I'm calling out my funders, that we can't be so lazy to say that doesn't work in that community. We have to dig down deep to get creative and try and figure out some other solutions.
You got to help people where they're at, not where you wish they were. Right?
Absolutely.
He's Shawn Wilson. Shawn, thanks for being on the show, Food for Thought, today. It's been a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for investing your one handful of life.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
Gerry Brisson and Dr. Phil Knight will be right back here on WJR.
It's Food for Thought with Dr. Phil Knight. And now another Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan moment.
I have Cathy McCune on the phone with me. She's a dairy farmer in Isabella County, and she's the chairperson for the state P&E program with the Michigan Farm Bureau. Cathy, help our listeners understand what the state P&E committee does and what it stands for.
Well, the Promotion and Education Committee is 30 years old. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary this past year. It's a group of 22 farmers that have a passion for sharing their story and promoting what they do every day and educating the public, both youth and adults, about where their food comes from and just agricultural in general. We look at all the commodities. We have a group that, we have several dairy farmers. We have crop farmers. We have a couple sheep farmers. So we have a really nice group of individuals that bring something. They all bring a different commodity to the group.
Right, brings a different perspective to the Promotion and Education Committee. So you're a dairy farmer, and tell us a little bit about that.
We are a centennial farm, which means that it's been in our family for over 100 years. In fact, our barn is 100 years old this year. It was built in 1917. And so we have had cows in the barn for all that time since the barn was built. And so my son will be the 5th generation. He's in his early 30s, and he's dairying with us. We're real happy that he chose that profession.
Right.
And we farm probably close to 500, maybe a little bit over that. We milk about 70 cows, so on the scale, we're probably considered one of the smaller farms, but, we like what we do, and we're just happy to be there.
Well, yeah. We're happy you're there, too. In fact, we just had Ken Nobis from the Michigan Milk Producers Association, and you guys are helping them to donate more than 150 gallons of milk per day into the Food Bank Council's network. And I'll have you, I don't know if you're aware of this, Cathy, but milk is the most requested item in any food pantry across our state.
Well, and I realize that we're working up here in our local church. We have a rotating rotating shelter. And so from, I would say, November to April, the different churches sign up and they host people that don't really have a place to stay at night. And so when it's our church's turn, we make sure on our behalf, on our farm behalf, that we have dairy there. And so, whether it's cottage cheese or ice cream or milk, we make sure there's always milk. One of the little girls, I think she was 4 or 5, she, was going to be at the homeless shelter that evening, and it was her birthday. And the people that were volunteering found out that the night before that it was going to be her birthday. So they went out and bought ice cream, and they got her a cake, and, they had the chocolate milk there. And that little girl had the nicest little birthday party with, because people stepped up and they cared. And, I think that farmers care, and if they see a need, especially when it comes to food insecurity, they are going to step up and be at the plate. What can we do to help? How can we help make sure that everybody has something to eat every day?
Well, thank you for your life of service, and we appreciate you being on the Michigan Farm Bureau Moment here on Food for Thought. Shawn Wilson has the manager from the Ford Fund has stepped away from the studio. He's on the road again, so to speak. Gerry, what an amazing young leader who has accomplished so much in his life and is really making our town, our community, our state better because of the investment of his life.
Yeah, leadership is so important. And when you have leaders who really understand the pathway to success and all the things that have to be a part of that pathway in order to lead to the next success, that is exactly the formula that we're trying to say is going to solve hunger.
Because I had the opportunity to sit here and see him. Our listeners didn't do that. The guy is so genuine.
Oh, no question.
I mean, it's not just words, or it's not just an ideology. It's not a philosophy that he read about or heard. This cat, he has lived it.
Yeah, there's no doubt he is bringing a huge value from his life experience to this work and helping us all learn a lot more about who we're serving, how we need to serve them, and how we can do better.
Some food for thought. We closed this show where we featured Shawn Wilson, manager from the Ford Fund. I think it's probably only appropriate that we end with a Henry Ford quote. Since we began the show and Shawn shared one, Henry Ford said, Gerry, as food for thought, before everything else, getting ready is the secret to success. And I think changing the conversation and using the show here on WJR to change the conversation about food insecurity and about solving hunger is that we have to build in the expectation that we are going to be successful. And getting ready to be successful and handling success when it comes is a key to our success. Thanks for listening to Food for Thought. I'm Dr. Phil Knight. He's Gerry Brisson, and we'll be back next week.
Food for Thought has been a presentation of Farm Bureau Insurance of Michigan and by the Food Bank Council of Michigan, creating a food-secure state.